For analysis on the ANC KwaZulu-Natal elective conference, we now cross via Zoom to Dr Fikile Vilakazi, who's a lecturer in public policy and political science at UKZN. Thank you so much for your time, Dr Vilakazi. Let's talk about the policies that should be discussed at this conference. I know yesterday you also spoke about how the likes of Nomsa Dube bring an interesting dynamic in terms of factoring gender in this whole conference. Let's talk about what should be discussed in this particular conference, Doctor.
Good morning, Mxolisi, once again, and good morning to viewers at home. At the center of a policy agenda of the African National Congress, there are key important things that I would suggest that are being looked at. One of them is really centered around the work of healing, as I've indicated in another conversation last night, how, for example, the ANC will return itself to the politic of decolonization, the politic of Pan-Africanization as well, mainly because of the issues that have been highlighted that are wounding South Africa in general, but also the province of KwaZulu-Natal, like the issue of the Royal House, the conflicts that are happening there, the healing of Umkhonto kaShaka, as I've mentioned. So returning to that power of ritual and cleansing is one important thing. But the second thing that I would suggest as a policy question is a human resource issue, because there are major problems in terms of the type of people that the ANC is recruiting to the organization. And these have been expressed in many fora, including the former President Thabo Mbeki, that it seems, after 1994, the ANC has attracted a certain caliber of people through its human resource policy, but also through its membership policy. So they would need to relook into questions of recruitment for employability, but also relook into how membership is being done, how recruiting members and the types of members in the ANC, but also the policies around the expulsion of members. And this now is centered around Section 25 of the ANC Constitution, where issues of the role of the Integrity Committee would need to be looked at. You would see on the public domain after the Zondo Commission that many of the ANC members who are implicated on scandals of corruption with charges in their name, some of them have been returned to the Integrity Committee. But even that Integrity Committee has lost confidence in the psyche of the people. So the ANC would then need to relook into Section 25. What are the conflicts sitting within Section 25 of the Constitution? And then, I would also say, let them look at Rule 17 of its own constitution, because Rule 17 of the African National Congress Constitution looks into issues of how, for example, provincial conferences are organized, issues of credentials, issues of branch general meetings, and so on. Perhaps also even issues of when to convene a provincial conference, should the need arise before time, for that to happen, who plays a role, to avoid issues of litigation, as we have seen in the 8th Provincial Conference, and perhaps a possibility may arise here with the issues of Ward 91. So they would need to look at Rule 17 in particular and make sure that members of the African National Congress are aware of what the provisions are. But I would also then say there is something about the policy of political education within the African National Congress. If you look at the ANC before 1994 and the ANC after 1994, we are really talking about a new ANC here. It is not a cadre of liberation. It is not a cadre of revolution as we know it pre-1994. So what would then need to happen at a policy level? My suggestion is that the ANC would need to go back into the drawing boards and relook into its own agenda as an organization for national liberation, right? And so many things have happened. We've seen a number of policies in various areas around land, around poverty and so on, but all of them don't seem to be working. So something there needs to happen around implementation. So at a policy level, when we talk about public policy, there are certain theories really that support ideas of how we can successfully get implementation to the ground, to the people. And I think that's where it lies. It may be that the ANC needs to recruit a different caliber of people to join the organization, public policies and public thinkers and so on. But if it has to be done by people within the organization, the policies then have got to enable political schooling within the ANC have to change its own curriculum. So they would need to look at the policies that speak about how do they run political education post-1994, because the kind of political education and the policies surrounding that happened pre-1994 were, of course, shaped around strengthening Umkhonto weSizwe, shaped around the liberation agenda and the liberation movement. But perhaps it is lacking in questions of public management. Perhaps it is lacking in terms of issues of political management, issues of ethics, and so on. So they would need to then re-look into that policy and inject those kinds of policies that are very key. The issue of ethics, the issue of public management, the issue of political management those are very important credentials. And to make sure, of course, that anybody then that leads, particularly at local government level, has got those credentials, has got those capabilities to be able not just to lead a revolution of struggle, but also to deliver when it comes to practical bread and butter issues of political and policy management and implementation.
Indeed, Dr. Vilakazi, and you're speaking about some of the issues that would be central to the hearts of most people there in KZN, and I know our colleagues Simphiwe Makhanya as well as Ayanda Mhlongo also touching on some of those issues, having been just coming back from COVID. They were faced with the July unrest, floods, as well as many other things as well. So when we put a sharp focus now on the leadership contest itself, Dr. Vilakazi, there's seemingly a tough contest for the position of provincial chairperson this year. Where do you think Sihle Zikalala went wrong, if he went wrong at all?
I do not actually think that it's a question of him having gone wrong. I think that it is a question of the manner in which former President Jacob Zuma has been treated, or the perceptions around how the African National Congress has treated former President Jacob Zuma, because clearly people like former President Jacob Zuma. Premier himself has really delivered in a number of things in the eyes of the people, at least. And I think the calls that are saying Phuma Sihle are not necessarily saying Phuma Sihle because you have not delivered, but they're saying Phuma Sihle for ideological reasons, which are really linked around making sure that the radical economic transformation agenda is pursued, at least in as far as it is linked to the faction that is connected to former President Jacob Zuma. So it is for those reasons that I think that those who are rallying for him not to come back, because people have been singing songs there, saying Phuma Sihle and so on, and of course calling for other candidates, particularly the eThekwini region is strong about this. They don't support former Premier Sihle Zikalala. So it's those things. I don't think really it's questions of service delivery, but I think what has been glaring recently are really challenges around things that have been mentioned already, the July unrest and the consequences of that. Policy, as we speak here, KwaZulu-Natal, people are still living in community halls. People do not have water. That is a serious question. When load shedding is happening all over the country, we were told KZN is not going to be load shedded, but some of us continue to be load shedded in our communities where we stay. Some of the things have been made. There were quick responses. Some of the bridges that have fallen have not been fixed. They are temporarily closed with cement and so on. There are many problems. The issue of housing, right? We can see now where we are sitting. People are starting to take land for themselves, to demarcate spaces so that they get out of community halls. So those are challenges that are facing the leadership of Sihle Zikalala, to say, what have you done to respond to the issues of people? The floods are a big deal. But the Shembe question has indicated the issue of the royal house really is a fundamentally deeper one in the province here, in terms of engaging with the leadership of Inkosi uMisuzulu, and his leadership and the battles really that are sitting at Kosini and the responsibility Kosini in the project of healing, in the project of decolonization. It seems that there's a sense that the leadership of Sihle Zikalala is not embedded in those issues, is not really keen, whereas the faction that is linked to Jacob former President Zuma is seen to be really connected, which is why you can see people like former Minister Uzweli Mkhize wearing the gear, engaging Namakosikazi and the royalty and so on. So there's those things that can weaken then his support in police.
All right, Dr. Vilakazi, speaking of the former president, well, like it or not, he's still a dominant feature, and we see him coming, in and out of even those chanting slogans. We heard how Mr. Zikalala was trying to douse fires, when the people started singing Wenze Nozuma. What do you make of such instances, especially when looking at the unity card that the ruling party has been so trying hard to drive?
Hey. It is really complex. It is touching the wound, right? It is touching the woundedness, and it's really just an expression. For me, it's a semblance.
Yes, you can continue, Doctor.
Okay, so I was saying it is a semblance of the depth of the woundedness that is sitting within, members of the African National Congress, but generally the citizens of KwaZulu-Natal who are really passionately in love with the former President Jacob Zuma. So those kinds of things, when you see them happening, they demonstrate that level of complexity. The song Wenzeni Uzuma, Premier Zikalala, defended that song, but the issue goes deeper than that, Mxolisi, and to the viewers at home, to way back. And I would like us to take it just as recent as CODESA, right? It goes back to the negotiations of CODESA. What are the things that we compromised during the CODESA? And the ANC, I would say, honestly, please really look into that question in the policy conversations of next week. And here in KwaZulu-Natal is talking about that. There's a question of the referendum, the national referendum. When there were negotiations that happened, we all know that former President W. de Klerk actually did a white-only referendum in the country, asking white people to say, what is it that you would like to see happening as we are now going to share power with the black majority in the country. So the white population of the country had an opportunity to engage with that question through a referendum and express themselves, right? Whereas the black majority was not given that opportunity. The manner in which negotiations happened, we were never consulted to be asked to say, as the black majority of the country, as those that have been really deeply wounded by apartheid, how then do you see this agenda of unity taking its place? And it is those things in policy that are at the center of the policy questions facing the ANC. When you're talking about the agenda of unity, the agenda of renewal, are you really thinking back that far to say perhaps we did it wrong from the point of CODESA? When we are talking about unity, can we go back to the people that were affected? There are comrades and families and communities who remained here at home when others were in exile. Those were equally wounded, just as much as those were in exile were wounded. As I've always indicated, we are still searching for bodies of our families as of today. Our families are deeply fragmented and have not healed from that, from everything that happened, including the migration patterns that we see and so on. And now we are fighting against one another. So now we need to go back to that policy to say, how do we then do this work of? So we need to go back to that national referendum. I think the country needs to still have that black majority national referendum to ask communities to say, in this depth of woundedness, because it is agenda of healing, right? How do you see the whole question of what other people call non-racialism unfolding itself? We don't want to just take it for granted that when we talk about non-racialism, we're talking about the same thing. Let's go to the center of the imagination of the people, the realities of the people on the ground who really have felt this. I am one of the survivors of the bullets of Imelo Yellows in Soweto. I could not be alive today when I was going to school, being shot during the state of emergency. And so many things happened in many of our families, as we know, and police. So let us hear the people are saying, given a chance to say, through a referendum, this is how we see the process of transitioning ourselves from apartheid into a place of healing, into a place of whatever we call it, whether we call it democracy or we call it a new South Africa or we call it anything. But that has not happened. And the ANC has got to apply its mind to that, because CODESA robbed us of that opportunity. And then since CODESA, 1994 was definitely not going to be possible, because when we left CODESA, it meant that the ANC is not really in power, right? And it is those reality, in terms of speaking. If you look at policy questions, the ANC has got to also check its own power. Really, the hegemony of the ANC is the ANC in power. Has the ANC been in power? And if the answer to that question is no, who then has been leading this country, right? So that's that. And there's, besides the question of corruption, I hear others are calling for amnesty. This even the former public protector Thuli Madonsela is saying, yes, the Zondo Commission has come out. Perhaps think about a possibility of an amnesty process. Of course, talking about the things that I'm also saying. Some of us in the feminist spaces where I come from, I belong also to the Lord Love Rebels Feminist Collective that is imagining this work. They're saying, let us have a new kind of a truth and reconciliation commission. Perhaps the national referendum could go to that space as well, where we are talking to each other, but also we really are putting hands together as citizens to say this work of healing has got to be made practical, even to the doorsteps, of our lives. You can't just talk healing somewhere there on top, and the reality of people on the ground do not change. So there's so much. There's really a lot, but the ANC is really faced with a huge responsibility of coming up with policies that will take us away from a state of decoloniality as a nation. If it has to be in power.
A mammoth task indeed, Dr. Vilakazi. Now, when we look at opposition parties and we look at the ANC's performance at last year's local government elections, are opposition parties likely to take advantage of all the factions that we're seeing right now in the ANC?
I think they should, please. I think they should, I think all of us should, in a sense that it is not just opportunism. It is a matter of life and death. It is a matter of patronage, it is a matter of public responsibility. The responsibility of healing South Africa is something that also we need to put in our psyche. It is not just lying with the African National Congress. It so happened that in 1994, when we voted, the African National Congress became the majority party. And of course, because of the party political system, then became a hegemonic force, because through the power of the majority rule, they always then had to vote in favor of whatever they wanted to see happening in the country. And that has shaped our narrative since then. But it doesn't mean the responsibility lies with the ANC. The opposition party equally has a responsibility. The question then is, what is the opposition doing, right? What has the opposition been doing? If the ANC is failing us, what is the EFF doing? What is the Democratic Alliance doing to actually take us to that place where the ANC is not seen to be taking us to? So it's an imperative. It's an imperative, especially if you're imagining a coalition government. South Africa does not have a framework at this point as we speak that is guiding political parties if we have to go forward with a political party system. We do not have a framework that says this is how coalitions government can be run in the country. And again, we are going to be sitting with that problem because we are going to coalitions. That is inevitable, right? We have seen it's happening already. But you also see the glitches in a sense that even as we know and we are aware as a nation that coalitions are facing us, no one is doing that work really of thinking deep to say, okay, how then are we going to make sure that the EFF and the ANC and the DA and the smaller parties, perhaps even civil society organizations on the ground, influential forces like, your gift of the givers and so on, work together in a coalition framework that is centered around an agenda of unity, an agenda of renewal, an agenda of healing the nation, regardless of the differences that are sitting in our different manifestos of political parties or manifestos and feminifestos of different organizations. Because at the center of all this work that we are doing, even if we are doing it differently, we are going to one place. We are saying we want to heal ourselves from coloniality. We want to take ourselves and lift ourselves out of apartheid. In our minds, in our psyches, we need to heal, right? But also in our realities, we need to eat. We need to have food when we walk out of the doorsteps. So that should be the agenda. But we need a framework. The South African Local Government Association, I think, came out with a draft. But that draft is not really being engaged with, right, in a fundamentally deeper way that we should before 2024. 2024 is tomorrow. Right, it's happening. We should already be seeing, in the public domain, is PTP, tipo, Dimkolisi, we're seeing busyness, political parties talking to communities. Yeah. We need to be going and talking to various spaces. We can see also there are formations that are coming up that are saying defend our democracy, the defend our democracy campaign that is also looking at protecting the constitution and so on. There's a lot happening in our communities, but we need to have that agenda that is singular, that is saying we have not healed, we are aware of our woundedness, but we can't continue to express our woundedness by destroying the very same country that we want to build. Let us be honest. Let us go to a national conversation. National referendum is one of the modalities that we could do it, right? But we could also really have face-to-face national conversations about the state of the nation. The state of the nation address is not the responsibility of a president. The state of the nation is a responsibility of us. We live these lives. We know the state of the nation, right? So the ANC may have a particular version of the state of the nation, but it's limited because it doesn't really capture the texture and the nuances of actually the real state of our lived realities on the ground. So that's the process that really the opposition parties are faced with. So it's not just a matter of opportunity. It's an imperative. We need to see beyond our differences. There's mama that we call Audre Lorde in the family spaces. She's really imagined this work to say the only challenge that we are sitting with here in South Africa and in other jurisdictions that have been affected by apartheid like the US is that we do not see the power of our differences.
Indeed.
It is our inability to actually embrace our political different agendas, our varied manifestos and manifestos and manifestos to a place where it brings us to to
Dr.
unity.
Fikile, I hate to have to interrupt you there, of course, and of course, I think we've just run out of time out of this chat, but I'm sure we will pick it up at a later point there. That is Dr. Fikile Vilakazi.